Hey guys, tonight we slip into the Soviet Union, where the air smells of coal dust and ambition, and the streets hum with the clatter of trams and the murmur of revolution. Picture yourself stepping out of a creaky wooden door into 1920s Moscow, where red banners flutter like restless birds against grey skies. The cobblestones are slick with morning frost, and you pull your threadbare coat tighter, already wondering if you'll snag a loaf of bread before the lines grow too long. Spoiler alert. You probably won't survive the bureaucracy without a strong cup of tea or something stronger. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in 1920s Moscow, the city pulsing with the raw energy of a new era. The Bolsheviks have just reshaped Russia, and the old world of Tsars and nobles is a fading memory. Your eyes blink open in a narrow bed, the mattress lumpy with straw, in a room that smells of damp plaster and boiled cabbage. Outside, the streets are alive with workers in flat caps, their boots crunching through slush as they hurry to factories or meetings. The revolution's promise hangs heavy: equality, progress, a new society. But as you step into the chilly morning, you feel the weight of uncertainty. The Civil War's scars linger buildings pockmarked by bullets, markets half empty. You pass a group of Red Army soldiers, their faces stern but tired, and you wonder if they believe the propaganda posters plastered on every wall, proclaiming a glorious future. Your first task is survival, and it starts with food. The state controls everything now, and ration cards are your lifeline. You clutch yours, a flimsy piece of paper stamped with red ink, and join a crowd outside a bakery. The line snakes around the block, and you're stuck behind a woman muttering about her missing husband, lost in the war. Hours pass, your toes numb in your boots, and you finally reach the counter only to find the shelves nearly bare. A single rye loaf sits like a museum piece, and the baker, with a face like a storm cloud, slices it thinner than your patience. You hand over your card, and she hands you a chunk of bread that feels more like a grudge. Mainstream history tells us the new economic policy, introduced in 1921, allowed some private trade to ease shortages, but it's a slow fix. You're not sure if you're eating progress or just crumbs of hope. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Muscovites swear by a rumor that Lenin himself once queued for bread incognito, just to feel the people's struggle. True or not, it's the kind of story that keeps folks whispering in lines, half laughing, half hoping. You tuck your bread under your arm and dodge a horse-drawn cart splashing mud. The city's a mix of old and new onion-domed churches stand next to concrete offices, and you can't help but smirk at the irony of a classless society where the party bigwigs ride in shiny cars while you trudge through slush. Your next stop is a workers' meeting, mandatory if you want to keep your job at the textile factory. The hall is packed, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the drone of a party official's voice. He's preaching about collective farms and industrial might, but your neighbour, Ivan, leans over and mutters, "Bet he's got a full pantry." You stifle a laugh joke, "Number one, folks," because humour's the only thing not rationed yet. The official's speech drags on, and you doodle on a scrap of paper, wondering if this is the future you're supposed to build. Historians still argue whether the early Soviet enthusiasm was genuine, or just fear dressed up as zealsome. Say the masses believed in the dream, others that they were too hungry to care. As you leave the meeting, the city's pulse quickens. A tram rattles by, overflowing with workers, and you catch a glimpse of a street performer juggling apples for kopecks. It's a small rebellion against the greyness, and you toss him a coin, feeling a spark of defiance. Your day's just begun, but already you're learning the Soviet rhythm. Wait, work, whisper, repeat. The revolution's promises are loud, but the reality's a quieter grind, and you're right in the middle of it, one step at a time. You're still in 1920s Moscow, the city's pulse a steady drum of footsteps and tram bells, but now you're squeezing into a communalka, a communal apartment where privacy is as scarce as fresh butter. Your boots squeak on the warped floorboards as you step into a cramped hallway, the air heavy with the smell of boiled potatoes and cigarette smoke. This is home, sort of. You share it with 3 other families, and the walls are so thin you can hear your neighbours' snores like they're in your bed. Remember that pickled beet tin from the market? It's tucked in your coat, a small treasure you'll have to hide from prying eyes. The communalka is a Soviet staple, a mainstream fact of urban life by the late 1920s as the state crammed multiple families into old bourgeois apartments to solve housing shortages. Your room is a corner of what used to be a grand parlour, now divided by flimsy curtains. You've got a bed, a chair, and a wobbly table where your bread and beets sit like trophies. The shared kitchen is down the hall, where a single stove serves 12 people. You sidle in, nodding to Anna, a seamstress who's arguing with Ivan, the factory worker, over who left the pot unwashed. "It's always my turn to scrub," she snaps, and you smirk joke number 1, because in this house, dish duty is a blood sport. You light the stove, its flames sputtering like it's as tired as you are, and warm your beets. The kitchen's a chaos of clanging pans and overlapping voices. Someone's kid is crying. Another neighbour's radio blares party anthems. You eat standing up, because sitting feels like tempting fate in this crowd. A quirky tidbit floats around. Some communalka residents keep pet canaries, claiming the birds warn them if the air gets too smoky from a neighbour's bad cooking. You glance at a cage in the corner, where a yellow bird chirps faintly, and wonder if it's guarding against more than just smoke. The bathroom's another battlefield. You queue because of course you doe for a turn at the single sink, shared by the whole floor. The mirror's cracked, and the tap drips like it's mocking you. You splash cold water on your face, dodging a glare from a neighbour who thinks you're taking too long. Historians still argue whether communal living forged unity or just resentment. Some say it built camaraderie, others that it turned neighbours into spies. You're leaning toward the latter as you catch Ivan eyeing your coat pocket, probably guessing you've got something worth bartering. Back in your corner, you try to carve out a moment of peace. You pull out a dog-eared book, one of the few not banned for bourgeois ideas, but the words blur as the couple next door argues about socks. You sigh, wishing for earplugs joke number 2, because silence is the real Soviet luxury. The communalka's rules are unspoken but ironclad. Don't hog the stove, don't snitch, don't trust. You've heard whispers of neighbours reporting each other to the authorities for anti-Soviet chatter, so you keep your thoughts to yourself, even when Anna offers you a sip of her homemade vodka. It's tempting, but you decline, remembering the guy arrested for sugar lumps. As night falls, the apartment quiets, though the walls creak like they're gossiping. You lie on your lumpy bed, the curtains swaying as someone passes in the hall. Outside, Moscow's streetlights cast a dim glow through your window, and you hear a distant balalaika, maybe that musician from yesterday. You smile faintly joke number 3, because that guy is probably sleeping better than you. You tuck your beets under the bed, hoping no one borrows them, and drift towards sleep, the city's hum blending with the communalka's restless rhythm. This is home, for better or worse, and you're learning to navigate its crowded, cautious heart. You're back in the Moscow chill, clutching that hard-won rye loaf from yesterday, its crust already going stale in your coat pocket. The city's awake now, and you're trudging through slush toward another linn this time for milk, maybe some potatoes if you're lucky. The air smells of coal smoke and wet wool, and the streets hum with the clatter of carts and the low buzz of voices, everyone careful not to say too much. You're in the thick of 1920s Soviet life, where queuing is practically a profession, and patience is your only currency. Remember that bread you snagged? It's your lifeline today, because the shelves are as unpredictable as a Moscow spring. The line stretches down a narrow street, flanked by grey buildings with peeling paint. You're shoulder to shoulder with workers, housewives, and kids who look like they've aged 10 years waiting for a turnip. The woman in front of you, her scarf knotted tight, grumbles about the price of soap tripled since last month. You nod, keeping your mouth shut. Loose talk can land you in trouble. The state's grip on supplies is a mainstream fact. By the mid-1920s, The Soviet government centralized distribution to prioritize workers and soldiers, but shortages hit everyone hard. You're not starving yet, but your stomach's growling louder than the party's promises. You shuffle forward, boots crunching ice, and notice a kid selling homemade kvass from a bucket. It's a quirky sight. He's barely 10, hawking fermented rye drink like a pro, dodging the militia who'd shut him down for speculation. You slip him a kopeck for a tin cupful, and the sour tang wakes you up. It's not just thirst you're craving, something normal, something that isn't stamped with a ration card. The kvass kid's a reminder of the hustle bubbling under the surface, where folks barter and trade to get by. Historians still argue whether these shortages built solidarity or just resentment. Some say the lines bonded people. Others that they bred quiet rage. The queue inches along, and you overhear a man joking about trading his boots for a sack of flour. "Good luck," you mutter, and he chuckles joke number 1, because if you can't laugh at hunger, what's left? You're halfway to the counter now, but the milk's gone and the potatoes are delayed. The clerk, a woman with a face like a closed door, offers you a can of pickled beets instead. You take it, because beets are better than nothing, and stuff the tin in your pocket next to the bread. It's a small victory, but in this world, small is all you get. As you leave, you pass a propaganda poster, a smiling worker holding a hammer, promising abundance. You roll your eyes joke number 2, because that guy's never stood in a line like this. The reality is grit and patience, with a side of bureaucracy. You head toward the market, hoping to trade those beets for something better. The streets are crowded now, with vendors whispering about smuggled butter or cloth from the countryside. You spot a woman selling apples, her hands red from the cold, and you swap a few kopecks for one. It's mealy but sweet, and you savor it while dodging a tram that nearly clips your elbow. Your day's not over. You've got work soon, but first, you stop at a communal kitchen where neighbors share a single stove. The room's steamy, smelling of cabbage and grease, and you nod to a guy stirring a pot of kasha. He's muttering about a co-worker who got arrested for hoarding sugar 3 lumps, apparently. You keep quiet, slicing your bread thin to make it last. The kitchen's a microcosm of Soviet life, shared, crowded, and tense, with everyone watching everyone else. You eat quickly, the kasha sticking to your ribs, and head out, knowing tomorrow's another line, another wait. The city's rhythm is relentless, but you're adapting. You tuck your scarf tighter, the apple's sweetness lingering, and weave through the crowd. A street musician plays a balalaika, and you toss him a coin, half smiling at his cheeky grin joke number 3, because he's probably got more charm than the party. The Soviet dream is loud, but the realities in these moments, a shared laugh, a hard-won beat, a line that never seems to end. You're up before dawn, the communalka still snoring as you lace up your boots and head out into Moscow's grey chill. The city's already stirring, streetlights flickering like they're as groggy as you are, and you're bound for the factory, where the Soviet machine churns out progressor, at least tries to. Your breath clouds in the air, smelling faintly of coal and frost, and you clutch a chunk of that stale rye bread from days ago, nibbling it as you dodge puddles. Remember those beets you hid under your bed? They're still safe. But you're saving them for a leaner day. For now, it's off to work, where the hum of machinery and the weight of quotas await. The factory looms ahead, a hulking mass of brick and smoke, its chimneys coughing black plumes into the sky. This is the heart of Soviet industry, a mainstream fact of the 1920s. The state pushed rapid industrialization, turning workers like you into cogs in a grand plan to outpace the West. You clock in, your card stamped by a foreman with eyes like a hawk, and step onto the factory floor. The noise hits you, first clanging metal, whirring belts, the rhythmic thud of presses. You're at a textile machine, feeding coarse thread into its jaws, your hands moving fast to meet the day's quota. Miss it, and you'll lose your ration card privileges. No pressure, right? The air's thick with lint, sticking to your clothes and throat, and you cough, wishing for a mask joke number 1, because fresh air's just another rationed dream. Your co-worker Sasha, a wiry guy with a permanent scowl, mutters about the new 5-year plan. More output, less food, he grumbles, and you nod, keeping your eyes on the machine. The state's obsessed with numberstons of steel, yards of cloth, but you're more worried about the burn in your shoulders after 10 hours at this beast. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some factories had shock workers, overachievers who'd smash quotas and get their faces on posters. But rumour has it one guy faked his output by recycling old cloth. Nobody snitched, because who has the energy? You glance at Sasha, wondering if he's tempted to try it. The foreman barks, and you refocus. Your fingers raw from the thread. Breaks are short, just enough time to gulp lukewarm tea from a shared kettle and trade a bite of your bread for a sliver of Sasha's sausage. It's salty and tough, but you savour it like a delicacy. Historians still argue whether the factory push built a stronger Soviet Union or just broke its workers some. Say it laid the foundation for industrial might. Others, that it crushed spirits under impossible demands. You're not sure where you stand, but your back's screaming and the clock's barely moved. The guy next to you, Victor, tries to lighten the mood, joking about a machine that eats thread faster than my wife eats gossip. You chuckle joke number 2, because factory humour's the only thing keeping you sane. Lunch is a bowl of watery cabbage soup in the canteen, where propaganda posters glare down, urging you to build socialism with every stitch. You roll your eyes joke number 3, because if socialism's built on your aching hands, it's got a shaky foundation. You eat quickly, the soup barely warming you, and head back to the line. The afternoon drags, each minute heavier than the last. But there's a strange rhythm to it. The clank of machines, the murmur of workers, the shared exhaustion that binds you. You catch Sasha humming a folk tune, and it softens the grind, just a little. As the shift ends, you stumble out into the dusk, the factory's smoke curling behind you like a tired ghost. Your hands are stained, your legs leaden, but you've earned your pie a few rubles and another day's ration card. The city's quieter now, the streets lit by flickering lamps. And you pass a kid selling matches, his face smudged with soot. You toss him a kopeck, thinking of that Kvass kid from the market days ago. The Soviet machine keeps turning, and you're part of it, for better or worse, threading your way through its relentless hum. You're back in the communalka, the faint hum of Anna's radio still seeping through the curtain as you wake to another grey Moscow morning. The air's thick with the usual mix of cabbage and mistrust, and you're already bracing for the day. You check under your bed those pickled beets are still there, a small victory in a world where everything feels watched. Today, you're stepping into the shadow of the NKVD, the secret police who make sure nobody steps out of line. Your boots hit the floor, and you move quietly, because in the Soviet Union of the late 1920s, a wrong word can land you in places colder than a Moscow winter. You slip out into the city, the streets buzzing with workers and the clatter of trams. The propaganda posters from yesterday still glare at you, but now you're noticing the way people glance over their shoulders, their voices dropping when a stranger passes. The NKVD, officially formed in 1934 but with roots in the earlier Cheka, is a mainstream fact of Soviet life. The state's eyes and ears, sniffing out enemies of the people. You keep your head down, passing a bakery where the line's shorter "Today Bad" sign means they're out of flour again. You clutch your coat, remembering that breadcrumb you traded for sugar, and hope nobody's watching too closely. At the factory, the mood's tense. Sasha, your co-worker, isn't at his machine, and nobody's saying why. You overhear a whisper. They took him last night. Your stomach twists, but you focus on the thread, your hands moving mechanically. The NKVD's presence is like a draft you can't shake. Nobody knows who's listening. A quirky tidbit floats around. Some folks swear they've seen NKVD agents disguise themselves as street vendors, selling kvass while eavesdropping. You think of that Kvass kid from days ago and wonder if his bucket's hiding a badge. It's paranoid, sure, but paranoia's just survival hero joke number 1, because if you're not paranoid, you're probably arrested. You take your break in the canteen, sipping watery tea and scanning the room. The guy across from you, Pyotr, keeps his eyes on his soup, but he mutters about a neighbour who vanished after complaining about quotas. You nod, silent, and crumble the last of your bread into your cup. Historians still argue whether the NKVD's fear tactics kept the Soviet system alive or just poisoned it. Some say they crushed dissent, others that they bred a nation of whispers. You're not sure, but the empty chair where Sasha sat feels like an answer. Back at the machine, you work faster, as if speed could keep you invisible. The foreman circling, his clipboard a weapon, and you wonder if he reports to someone in a dark coat. You catch a co-worker slipping a note to another, and your heart skips. Notes are dangerous. You look away, pretending you saw nothing. Later, on your way home, you pass a man in a long coat loitering by a tram stop. He's reading a newspaper, but his eyes flick up, meeting yours for a split second. You keep walking, your pulse loud enough to drown out the street noise. Joke number 2. Because if your heart's a traitor, at least it's loud about it. In the communalka, the tension's thicker. Anna's radio is off tonight, and she's quieter, stirring her pot with a frown. You don't ask about Sasha, nobody does. You eat your beets, the vinegary tastes sharp, and try to focus on the mundane. But the walls feel like they're listening, and you keep your thoughts locked tight. As you lie in bed, the city's hum outside is softer, but it's not comforting. You hear footsteps in the hall, probably just Ivan, but you pull your blanket closer. Sleep comes slow, and you dream of eyes in the shadows, watching, always watching. Joke number 3. At least the NKVD's good at something, making sure you never feel safe. You're jolted awake in the communalka. The thin curtains swaying as a distant siren wails through Moscow's pre-dawn gloom. It's the early 1940s now, and the Soviet Union's locked in the grip of the Great Patriotic War, World War II's brutal Eastern Front. The air smells of ash and fear, and you fumble for your boots, your breath visible in the chilly room. Those pickled beets under your bed are long gone, replaced by a tin of dried peas you guard like gold. The war's changed everything, and you're stepping into a world where survival means more than dodging. The NKVD means enduring bombs, hunger, and the constant shadow of loss. You slip out into the city, where the streets are quieter, the usual tram clatter drowned by the drone of air raid sirens. Moscow's under siege, a mainstream fact. By 1941, Nazi forces were closing in, and the city became a fortress of sandbags and anti-aircraft guns. You pass boarded-up shops and posters urging you to defend the motherland. No cheerful workers now, just grim soldiers staring from the walls. You're headed to the factory, but it's not textiles anymore. Your plant's been retooled to churn out tank parts. The work's grueling, and the quotas are relentless. But nobody complains not when the enemy's knocking. At the factory, the air's thick with oil and metal dust, the machines screaming louder than ever. Your hands, already calloused, now wrestle with heavy steel, each bolt a small act of defiance. Your hungry rations are tighter than ever, and your daily bread is a greyish slab that tastes like sawdust. A quirky tidbit. Some workers swear by chewing pine needles for vitamins, claiming it staves off scurvy. You tried it once. It was like eating a Christmas tree, and you're not sure it's worth it. Joke number 1, because you'd rather starve than kiss a pine cone again. The foreman's voice cuts through the noise, barking about production goals, but you catch a tremor in it. He's got a son at the front, and nobody's heard from him in weeks. You keep your head down, tightening bolts, but your mind's on the radio reports. Stalingrad's bleeding, Leningrad's starving. Historians still argue whether the Soviet war effort was driven by patriotism or sheer terrorism. Say the people rallied for the motherland. Others that Stalin's iron fist left no choice. You're not sure where you stand, but the ache in your stomach and the cold in your bones make the debate feel distant. During a break, you huddle in the canteen, sipping ersatz coffee barley, not beans, because real coffee's a memory. A co-worker, Lena, whispers about a neighbour who got a letter from the front, only to learn it was months old. You nod, silent, crumbling your bread into the cup to make it last. The air raid siren wails again, and you scramble to the shelter, a damp basement where you sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers, the ground shaking as bombs fall somewhere close. Lena mutters a joke about the shelter being cozier than her communalka, and you force a smile. Joke number 2, because humor's the only thing not rationed. Back above ground, the city's a maze of rubble and resolve. You pass a woman selling knitted socks, her hands trembling, and trade a few kopecks for a pair. They're scratchy but warm, and you pull them on, grateful for small mercies. On your way home, you spot a kid scrawling "Victory" on a wall, his chalk snapping in the cold. You toss him a pea from your tin, and he grins joke number 3, because he's got more hope than the rest of you combined. In the communalka, the radio's on, crackling with news of battles far away. You eat your peas, the taste dull but steady, and lie down. The city's pulse, a mix of defiance and dread. Sleep comes hard, with dreams of sirens and snow, but you hold tight to the thought of tomorrow, because tomorrow you'll keep going. You wake in the communalka, the war's echoes fading into the mid-1950s, where Moscow's air carries a new scentless ash, more damp concrete and cautious hope. The sirens are gone, but the city's still scarred, with pockmarked buildings and a quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. You pull on your boots, the ones you got from that sock-selling woman during the war, now patched but still warm. Your tin of peas is long gone, replaced by a jar of pickled cabbage you traded for at the market. You're stepping into Khrushchev's thaw, a time when the Soviet grip loosens just enough to let you breathe but not too deeply. The streets are busier now, trams rattling with workers in slightly less threadbare coats. You're headed to the factory, still churning out parts, but the propaganda's softened, less about tanks and more about peaceful progress. Khrushchev's in charge, and his 1956 secret speech denouncing Stalin's excesses is a mainstream fact that's shaken the system. You feel it in the IRA cautious openness, like a window cracked after a long winter. People whisper about reforms, about maybe not living in fear, but you keep your thoughts quiet, remembering the NKVD's shadow from years ago. At the factory, the machines hum steadier, and your hands move with muscle memory, bolting parts for tractors now instead of tanks. The quotas are still high, but the foreman's less likely to report you for a slow day. You overhear Lena, your wartime canteen buddy, talking about a new book she redone that wasn't banned. It's a small miracle, and you smile, thinking of that canary in the communalka kitchen, chirping freer no-joke number 1, because even the birds seem to know Stalin's gone. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Muscovites started hosting kitchen talks, late-night debates over tea about politics and art, now that the secret police aren't knocking as often. You've been to one, crammed in Anna's corner of the communalka, where Ivan argued about jazz records like they were state secrets. You didn't say much, just sipped your tea, but it felt like a rebellion to even listen. Historians still argue whether the thaw was a genuine cultural shift or just a safety valve to keep the system from cracking some, say it freed minds, others that it was too little, too late. You're not sure, but the fact that you're not looking over your shoulder every second feels like progress. On your break, you head to the canteen, where the soup's less watery, maybe even has a potato or two. You trade a slice of your cabbage for Lena's apple, its tartness a rare treat. The radio's playing a folk tune, not a party anthem, and you hum along, earning a grin from a new guy who jokes about Khrushchev's love for cornfields. "Man thinks we're all farmers now," he says, and you chuckle joke number 2 because corn's a weird hill to die on. After work, you wander past a cinema showing a new film, one that doesn't glorify war but tells a quiet story about love. The line's long, and you don't have the rubles, so you keep walking, passing a street artist sketching a couple dancing. You toss him a kopeck, his smile brighter than the old propaganda posters. The city's changing new apartment blocks are rising, promising private flats instead of communalkas. You're skeptical. You've heard that promise before joke number 3, because Soviet blueprints are as reliable as a Moscow weather forecast. Back in the communalka, Anna's radio plays softly, and you smell her cooking cabbage, but with a hint of meat, a luxury. You eat your share, savouring the warmth, and lie down. The curtain's still swaying, but the air less heavy. The thaw's fragile, but it's something, and as you drift towards sleep, Moscow's hum feels softer, like the city's learning to exhale. You're stirring in the communalka, the faint clink of Anna's kettle pulling you from sleep as Moscow hums outside, now in the late 1950s. The air's less bitter, carrying the scent of fresh paint from new apartment blocks rising beyond your window. Your patched boots still creak, but you've got a new treasure, a small radio of your own, bartered for with a week's worth of pickled cabbage. The thaw's still unfolding, and you're stepping into a moment of Soviet pride. The space race, where the sky's no longer the limit. You slip out, the city's pulse quickening with talk of stars and satellites, and you feel a spark of something rare hope. The streets are alive with workers and students, their chatter buzzing about Sputnik, the little metal ball that beeped its way into orbit in 1957. It's a mainstream fact. The Soviet Union beat the West to space, launching the first satellite and igniting national pride. You pass a newsstand where papers scream, "Victory in the cosmos," next to a cartoon of a smiling Sputnik circling Earth. You can't help but grin. For once, the propaganda feels like it might be true. You're headed to a public lecture at a community hall, one of those new cultural events Khrushchev's pushing. The topic? Soviet space triumphs, of course. Inside the hall, it's packed, the air thick with cigarette smoke and excitement. You squeeze onto a bench, your radio tucked in your coat, and listen as a scientist in a stiff suit explains orbits with a chalkboard sketch. The crowd's riveted, clapping when he mentions Yuri Gagarin, the cosmonaut who'll soon be the first man in space. You feel your chest swell, a rare moment where you're not just a factory cog. A quirky tidbit. Some Muscovites swear they saw Sputnik's faint light in the night sky, holding star parties with binoculars and vodka. You haven't seen it, but you've heard Ivan planning one, and you're tempted to crash joke number one, because stargazing beats queuing for potatoes any day. The lecturer drones on, but your mind wanders to the factory, where your machine now spits out parts for rockets, not just tractors. It's grueling, but there's a buzz among the workers, like you're all building the future. Historians still argue whether the space race was about science or just Cold War bragging. Some say it pushed human progress, others that it was a distraction from breadlines. You're not sure, but the idea of a Soviet man touching the stars makes your aching hands feel lighter. On your way out, you stop at a kiosk for tea, the vendor humming a tune about cosmonauts. You trade a kopeck for a steaming glass and sip it slowly, savouring the warmth. A kid nearby is selling hand-drawn Sputnik pictures, and you buy one for a coin, his grin brighter than the lecture's chalkboard joke number 2, because he's probably dreaming of being Gagarin. The city feels electric, with posters of rockets replacing old war slogans. You pass a group of students debating space travel, their voices loud until a militiaman strolls by, and they hush. Old habits die hard. Back in the communalka, Anna's cooking something that smells like actual soup, not just cabbage water. You tune your radio, catching a broadcast about the cosmos, and eat your meal, the Sputnik sketch propped on your table. The thaws made things like this possible: music, ideas, a glimpse beyond the grey. You lie down, the curtains still but the air alive with possibility. As you drift off, you imagine that beep-beep from space, a sound that says the Soviet Union's reaching higher, even if your feet are still stuck in Moscow's mud joke number 3, because the stars are free. But the tram fare isn't. You wake to the familiar creak of the communalka, the air heavy with the scent of damp plaster and Anna's eternal cabbage soup. It's the 1970s now, and Moscow's settled into a sluggish rhythm under Brezhnev, where the thaw's spark has dimmed to a flicker. Your radio, that prized trade from the space race days, crackles with static. Its once bold broadcasts now droning about grain yields. You pull on your boots, still those patched ones from the war years, and check your stash. A jar of pickled mushrooms, bartered for with a factory co-worker. You're stepping into Brezhnev's stagnation, where the Soviet dream feels like a treadmill, lots of effort, nowhere to go. The streets are grey, the trams rattling with the same tired faces you've seen for years. You're headed to the factory, where the machines grind on, spitting out tractor parts that might never reach a field. Brezhnev's era, a mainstream fact of the 1960s and 70s, is marked by economic slowdown and bureaucratic bloat growth stalled, but nobody dares say it out loud. You pass a faded poster of a smiling worker, its edges curling like it's given up too. The city's still crowded, but the energy's gone flat, like tea left out too long. You dodge a puddle, wishing for that Sputnik buzz from a decade ago. At the factory, your hands move on autopilot, bolting parts under the foreman's watchful eye. The quotas haven't eased, but the urgency has nobody believes the 5-year plans will change much anymore. Lena, still at her machine, whispers about a co-worker who got a promotion for loyalty, not skill. You nod, keeping your eyes on your work. A quirky tidbit. Some workers smuggle out factory scraps to build homemade radios, tuning into Western stations for forbidden jazz. You've heard one, faint and crackly, in Ivan's corner of the communalka, and it felt like stealing a piece of the sky joke #1, because music's the only thing moving faster than inflation. The canteen's no better than before soup, still watery, though you spot a carrot today, a rare guest star. You trade a mushroom for a slice of Lena's bread, and she jokes about the Brezhnev diet. Less food, more medals. You chuckle joke #2, because the man's got more pins on his chest than a tailor's cushion. The radio in the corner drones about a new dam project, but nobody listens. Historians still argue whether stagnation was a failure of leadership or just the system buckling under its own weight. Some say Brezhnev coasted on past glories, others that the people were too tired to care. You're leaning toward the latter, your back aching as you return to your machine. After work, you wander past a market where vendors hawk wilted vegetables and dubious meat. You trade a few rubles for a turnip, clutching it like it's Sputnik itself. The city's quiet, the old revolutionary fire smothered by paperwork and apathy. You pass a kid kicking a deflated ball, his coat too big, and toss him a kopeck. He grins, and you think of that Sputnik sketch kid from years back joke #3, because hope's still free, even if everything else costs more. Back in the communalka, Anna's radio plays a tired folk song, and you eat your turnip, its bite sharp but grounding. The mushrooms stay hidden, you're not sharing tonight. As you lie down, the curtain sways, and the city's hum feels heavier, like it's stuck in mud. You tune your radio, hoping for a snatch of jazz, but it's just more static. The stagnation's not just economic, it's in the air, the conversations, the way people move. You close your eyes, dreaming of motion, of something breaking through the grey, but sleep pulls you under, slow and steady, like the Soviet machine itself. You're stirring in the communalka, the familiar scent of damp walls and Anna's overcooked cabbage pulling you from a dream of static-filled jazz. It's the late 1970s now, and Moscow's still trudging through Brezhnev's stagnation, but there's a new undercurrent in the IRA whisper of rebellion, not in the streets but in back rooms and alleyways. You lace up your boots, those war-era relics still holding together, and check your stash, a pair of smuggled blue jeans, traded for a month's worth of pickled mushrooms. You're stepping into the Soviet black market, where forbidden goods like Western records and denim are worth more than rubles. The streets are grey as ever, the trams clanking with workers who look like they've forgotten how to smile. You're not headed to the factory today, it's your day off, a rare break from the grind. Instead, you're slipping toward a quiet corner of the city where a guy named Yuri deals in imports. The black market's a mainstream fact of Soviet life by now, with state stores perpetually understocked. Underground traders fill the gaps, bartering everything from cigarettes to Beatles LPs. You pass a faded poster praising collective farms, its colours leached by rain, and smirk joke #1, because the only thing growing faster than wheat is Yuri's stash of contraband. You find Yuri in an alley behind a bakery, his coat bulging with goods. He's twitchy, eyes scanning for militia, but he grins when he sees you. "Got a Rolling Stones record," he whispers, pulling out a scratched vinyl. You trade your last turnip and a few kopecks for it, your heart racing like you're dodging the NKVD again. A quirky tidbit. Some black marketeers use coded phrases, like buying potatoes for records or new boots for jeans, to throw off eavesdroppers. You stuff the record in your coat, feeling like a spy in a bad movie joke #2, because espionage is easier when it's just Mick Jagger. The risk is real though. You've heard of guys getting years in labor camps for selling Western goods. Historians still argue whether the black market undermined Soviet control or kept it afloat. Some say it exposed the system's failures, others that it let people cope without rebelling outright. You're not sure, but the weight of that vinyl feels like freedom, even if it's fleeting. You head to a friend's flat, not the communalka, where Ivan's rigged a turntable from factory scraps. The needle scratches, and satisfaction crackles through the room, low enough to avoid nosy neighbors. You sip tea, grinning, as Ivan does a terrible Jagger impression. On your way back, you pass a state store, its shelves half empty except for cans of questionable fish. A woman's arguing with the clerk, and you keep moving, your jeans hidden under your coat. The city's hum is dull, but the black market's pulse is alive, threading through back streets like a secret river. You spot a kid selling hand-drawn comics, clearly copied from Western magazines, and toss him a coin joke number 3, because he's braver than most party bosses. Back in the communalka, Anna's radio drones about steel production, but you're humming a Stones riff, the record tucked under your mattress. You eat a slice of bread stale, but it's something, and lie down, the curtains swaying as always. The black market's dangerous, but it's a spark in the grey, a reminder that people find ways to bend the rules. You close your eyes, the faint echo of rock and roll in your head, and drift towards sleep, wondering what else you could trade for a taste of the outside world. You wake in the communalka, the faint scratch of your hidden Rolling Stones record still humming in your mind, though you'd never dare play it with Anna's nosy ears nearby. It's the early 1980s now, and Moscow's air feels taut, like a string about to snap. You pull on your boots, those patched survivors from decades past, and check your stash. A single jar of pickled herring, a treasure from a recent black market trade. You're stepping into the Cold War's paranoid heart, where the threat of nuclear war looms like a storm cloud, and every drill feels like a rehearsal for the end. The streets are tense, the usual tram clatter overlaid with a low buzz of unease. You're headed to a mandatory civil defense drill, a mainstream fact of the era. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was deep in Cold War paranoia, with the US as the enemy and nuclear drills a regular ritual. You pass a poster of a stern soldier pointing at you, captioned, "Be vigilant," as if you needed the reminder. The city's grey, but the fear's vivid, painted in the faces of passers-by clutching ration cards like lifelines. You think of those jeans under your mattress and wonder if they'd survive a Fallout joke number 1, because denim's tougher than most of us. At the drill site, a concrete courtyard near the factory, you join a crowd of workers and school kids, all shivering in the morning chill. A militia officer barks instructions: duck, cover, find shelter. You practice crouching under a flimsy table, feeling like a kid playing hide-and-seek with a bomb. A quirky tidbit: some Muscovites kept nuclear kits at home, iodine pills, canned food and vodka, because why not? You've got your herring, but you're not sure it counts. The officer's voice drones on about radiation, and you exchange a glance with Lena, who rolls her eyes joke number 2, because if the world ends, at least you'll skip tomorrow's quota. The drill ends, and you're back on the streets, passing a radio blaring Reagan's Evil Empire speech, translated to sound extra menacing. It's all part of the game, but it makes your stomach knot. Historians still argue whether the Cold War paranoia strengthened Soviet unity or just exhausted it. Some say the drills rallied people, others that they bred cynicism. You're leaning towards cynicism as you dodge a kid handing out leaflets about imperialist threats. You head to the factory, where the machines grind on, now making parts for missiles instead of tractors. Your hands move automatically, but your mind's on the sky, wondering if it'll ever rain fire. At lunch, you sip watery tea in the canteen, trading a slice of herring for a chunk of Lena's bread. She whispers about a co-worker who got questioned for listening to Radio Free Europe. You nod, silent, and glance at the canteen's lone poster, faded but still preaching vigilance. The fear's real, but so is the fatigue. After work, you pass a street vendor selling homemade gas masks shoddy, but you buy one for a kopeck, more for luck than faith. You smirk joke number 3, because if the bombs fall, You'll look like a scuba diver in a snowstorm. Back in the communalka, Anna's radio plays a patriotic tune, but you tune it out, eating your herring with a stale crust. The walls feel closer tonight, the air heavier with what-ifs. You lie down, the curtains swaying, and try to imagine a world without drills or dread. Sleep comes slowly. The city's hum laced with a distant siren, and you dream of open skies. Even if they're just a memory of Sputnik's fleeting beep, you stir in the communalka, the familiar creak of floorboards and the faint tang of herring lingering from last night's meal pulling you awake. It's the mid-1980s now, and Moscow's air carries a new current, something like possibility, sharp and fragile. Cutting through the Cold War's heavy fog, you lace up your boots, those patched veterans still clinging to life, and check your stash, a small stack of newspapers, bold new ones that dare to print more than party platitudes. You're stepping into the era of glasnost, Gorbachev's policy of openness, where the Soviet system starts to crack open, letting in whispers of change. The streets hum with a restless energy, trams clattering past posters that, for once, don't just preach vigilance. You're headed to a newsstand, drawn by rumours of articles criticising corruption unthinkable a few years ago. Glasnost, launched in 1985, is a mainstream fact. Gorbachev's reforms encouraged freer speech and media, shaking the Soviet silence. You grab a copy of Ogonyok, its pages sharp with ink and sharper with critique, and tuck it under your arm. The vendor, an old man with a sly grin, mutters, "Careful, that paper's got teeth now." You smirk joke number one because a newspaper biting harder than your bread is progress. You wander toward a park, where students and workers gather, debating openly for the first time. A guy in a scarf reads aloud about factory mismanagement, his voice low but fearless. You listen, leaning against a tree, the newspaper crinkling in your hands. A quirky tidbit. Some Muscovites started writing anonymous letters to editors, venting decades of frustration, and papers actually printed them. You've thought about writing one, maybe about the factory's endless quotas, but you're not that brave yet. The crowd's buzzing, and you feel a spark, like that Sputnik pride years ago, but grounded, human. Historians still argue whether glasnost was a genuine thaw or a desperate bid to save a crumbling system. Some say it empowered people, others that it unleashed chaos the party couldn't control. You're not sure, but the air feels lighter, even if the bread lines haven't shrunk. You head to the factory, where the machines still grind, but the foreman's less hawkish, distracted by his own copy of Literaturnaya Gazeta. Lena's there, whispering about a banned book she read, smuggled from a friend. You nod, keeping your eyes on your bolts, but your mind's on those newspapers, their words like keys to a locked door. At lunch, you sip tea in the canteen, trading a kopeck for a boiled egg rare luxury. A co-worker jokes about Gorbachev's birthmark, calling it a map to reform. You chuckle joke number two, because even the leader's forehead is fair game now. The radio's on, playing a pop song, not propaganda, and you hum along, feeling almost reckless. After work, you pass a street artist painting a mural of open hands, not hammers. You toss him a coin, his nod a silent thank you joke number three, because art's outlasting the old slogans. Back in the communalka, Anna's radio is quieter, tuned to a debate, not an anthem. You spread your newspaper on your table, reading by lamplight about strikes in far-off cities. The herring's gone, but you've got bread and a sliver of hope. You lie down, the curtains swaying, and the city's hum feels differentless like a machine, more like a crowd waking up. Sleep comes easier tonight, with dreams of words, not bombs, and the faint rustle of newsprint carrying you into the dark. You wake in the communalka, the faint rustle of your Ogonyok newspaper still under your pillow, its bold words lingering like a half-remembered dream. It's the late 1980s now, and Moscow's air feels brittle, like ice about to crack. You pull on your boots, those patched relics that have outlasted Empire Sand, check your stash. A single onion, traded for a factory favour, its sharp scent a reminder of leaner days. You're stepping into the Soviet Union's final act, where glasnost's openness has torn the system's seams, and collapse looms like a shadow you can't outrun. The streets are restless, trams rattling past crowds that move with purpose, not just routine. You're headed to a market, hoping to barter your onion for something edible, but the city's buzzing with whispers of strikes and shortages. The Soviet system's unraveling, a mainstream fact of the late 1980s. Gorbachev's reforms glasnost and perestroika meant to fix the economy and open society, instead exposed its rot, sparking unrest. You pass a wall where someone scrawled "Freedom" over a faded Lenin poster, and you pause, wondering who's bravier, reckless enough to do it. You smirk joke number one, because defacing Lenin's face takes more guts than queuing for bread. At the market, stalls are half empty, vendors haggling over wilted carrots and questionable meat. You trade your onion for a small loaf, its crust suspiciously soft, and overhear two women arguing about Yeltsin, the brash politician challenging Gorbachev. A quirky tidbit. Some Muscovites started hoarding matches and salt, convinced the state's collapse would leave them bartering like it's 1917 again. You've got your loaf, but you're tempted to stockpile two better safe than starving. You move on, dodging a kid selling homemade pins with Gorbachev's birthmark cartooned on them. You toss him a Kopek joke number two, because even the kids are cashing in on chaos. The factory's quieter today, machines idling as workers whisper about strikes in the Baltics. Lena's reading a smuggled pamphlet, its pages thin as hope, and you catch a line about independence movements. You keep your head down, bolting parts for trucks that might never roll. Historians still argue whether the Soviet collapse was inevitable or accelerated by Gorbachev's reforms. Some say the system was doomed by its own weight, others that glasnost's truth-telling broke its spine. You're not sure, but the empty shelves and angry murmurs tell you something's ending. The foreman's absent, probably at a party meeting, and you wonder if even he believes in the plan anymore. After work, you join a crowd near a metro station where a man's shouting about democracy on a soapbox. Militia hover nearby, but they don't stop him another crack in the system. You listen, clutching your loaf, and feel a mix of thrill and dread. The city's pulse is erratic, like a heart skipping beats. Back in the communalka, Anna's radio is off, replaced by neighbours arguing about prices. You eat your bread, its taste oddly sour, and think of that ogonyok under your pillow. Words that once felt like keys now feel like sparks. You lie down, the curtain swaying, and the city's hum is chaotic, a mix of defiance and despair. Sleep comes fitfully, with dreams of falling walls and empty shelves. Joke number three, because if the Soviet Union's a house, the roof's already gone. You wake in the communalka, the war's echoes fading into the mid-1950s, where Moscow's air carries a new scentless ash, more damp concrete and cautious hope. The sirens are gone, but the city's still scarred, with pockmarked buildings and a quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. You pull on your boots, the ones you got from that sock-selling woman during the war, now patched but still warm. Your tin of peas is long gone, replaced by a jar of pickled cabbage you traded for at the market. You're stepping into Khrushchev's thaw, a time when the Soviet grip loosens just enough to let you breathe but not too deeply. The streets are busier now, trams rattling with workers in slightly less threadbare coats. You're headed to the factory, still churning out parts, but the propaganda's softened, less about tanks and more about peaceful progress. Khrushchev's in charge, and his 1956 secret speech denouncing Stalin's excesses is a mainstream fact that's shaken the system. You feel it in the IRA cautious openness, like a window cracked after a long winter. People whisper about reforms, about maybe not living in fear, but you keep your thoughts quiet, remembering the NKVD's shadow from years ago. At the factory, the machines hum steadier, and your hands move with muscle memory, bolting parts for tractors now instead of tanks. The quotas are still high, but the foreman's less likely to report you for a slow day. You overhear Lena, your wartime canteen buddy, talking about a new book she redone that wasn't banned. It's a small miracle, and you smile, thinking of that canary in the communalka kitchen, chirping freer no joke number 1, because even the birds seem to know Stalin's gone. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Muscovites started hosting kitchen talks, late-night debates over tea about politics and art, now that the secret police aren't knocking as often. You've been to one, crammed in Anna's corner of the communalka, where Ivan argued about jazz records like they were state secrets. You didn't say much, just sipped your tea, but it felt like a rebellion to even listen. Historians still argue whether the thaw was a genuine cultural shift or just a safety valve to keep the system from cracking some, say it freed minds, others that it was too little, too late. You're not sure, but the fact that you're not looking over your shoulder every second feels like progress. On your break, you head to the canteen, where the soup's less watery, maybe even has a potato or two. You trade a slice of your cabbage for Lena's apple, its tartness a rare treat. The radio's playing a folk tune, not a party anthem, and you hum along, earning a grin from a new guy who jokes about Khrushchev's love for cornfields. "Man thinks we're all farmers now," he says, and you chuckle joke number 2 because corn's a weird hill to die on. After work, you wander past a cinema showing a new film, one that doesn't glorify war but tells a quiet story about love. The line's long, and you don't have the rubles, so you keep walking, passing a street artist sketching a couple dancing. You toss him a kopeck, his smile brighter than the old propaganda posters. The city's changing new apartment blocks are rising, promising private flats instead of communalkas. You're skeptical. You've heard that promise before joke number 3, because Soviet blueprints are as reliable as a Moscow weather forecast. Back in the communalka, Anna's radio plays softly, and you smell her cooking cabbage, but with a hint of meat, a luxury. You eat your share, savouring the warmth, and lie down. The curtain's still swaying, but the air less heavy. The thaw's fragile, but it's something, and as you drift towards sleep, Moscow's hum feels softer, like the city's learning to exhale.